Joining us this morning is no stranger to us here in Tobago and, of course, at Tobago Updates, Pastor Clive Dottin. I want to welcome you this morning to GMT.
Good morning. I am delighted to be here. So thanks for having me again.
And of course, our viewers who are familiar with Pastor Dutton, you know that he shares how he feels and he shares not just what problems are, but ways we can deal with what our society is going through. And Pastor Dutton, this morning I want us to talk about crime. And as we talk about it, I want us to delve in domestic violence for a bit. But let's just talk about crime in general. It's the front page even more than ever. With the use of social media, many of us are more aware of what's going on around us, and of course, the negative is often highlighted. From where you sit, someone who is on the ground, someone who is involved in communities, young people, what are your thoughts on where we are at with crime in Trinidad and Tobago?
Well, I think there's a sense of denial in terms of crime. I think almost, sorry to say it, we think there's a magic wand and we're searching for that magic wand, and as we wave it, crime will go. And I think we are losing the battle against crime. I'm in New York, by the way. I'm doing a evangelistic campaign in Utica Avenue. And what I see here, and I just came off looking at the news online, is that we have had the woman was killed, went to check her property, was the dream of her life, she and her husband, and she was murdered by three men. Then I saw another murder taking place, and yet another one that they are verifying. And I hear what's happening in Tobago there, that if you're not careful, you could register your 17 murder today. If that guy doesn't come out of the highly critical position he's in. So, number one, we are losing the battle. I want to make that quite clear. Whether you put Scotland or Ireland or Russia or Pakistan, we're losing the battle. So we could put any number of people until we realize we have lost the battle and how we could start back winning, then we are going nowhere. That's the first point I want to make, with malice to none and love for all. Secondly, the amount of volunteers in the trenches, all right, there are just very few of us left. I think if you have three or two of us, you have a lot. All right, so that is critical to our understanding of what's going on. The other thing is the big push of crime happens to be the drug trade. And what you have happening, and the first person to tell me this was someone I think you would know, the manager of our rehab center in Motura. He said, the turfs are decreasing and the drug dealers are multiplying. That's the drug dealers at the lower level of what I call the mafiatic pyramid. So that is happening. Now, what is going on in Trinidad, especially and Tobago to a minor extent? Well, it's not minor extent, it's more from
Yeah,
minor
maybe
to
not minor
medium.
anymore.
Right. What is happening is that there are two things that people are now talking about. One is what I call cars, as opposed to CARICOM when it comes to recruiting our young people. And I got this from two principals in Trinidad. And then I checked onto a third secondary school and I found the same thing happening. What you have is that the drug dealer in the community where the schools are, all right? Let's say Area X has a drug dealer or a gang leader, and he's appointing Form 4, Form 5 student within the school to be his assistant. All right. Now, what you have going on there, and he is supposed to recruit young people in X's secondary school. But what is happening is that some young people, because of their connection, Leela Ramjeen from the Catholic Social Justice Commission talks about the migratory criminal. So the young fellas now who have their connections within a larger space are going to other schools and recruiting. And as we say in our church, nobody could recruit youth like other youth. And that is a fact. The psychologists bear that out. So you have that situation. But beyond the Trinidad situation, you have the CARICOM situation. All right. And I call it the CARS. All right. That is Caribbean Alliance Recruiting Strategy. All right. Their strategy is to move from one place to another. We just had Utah, which was the Caribbean Youth Congress, and young people have been talking to me. And before that, their leaders were talking to me. What you have going on there is that you have Trinidad gang leaders recruiting in St. Lucia, St. Vincent, I knew since 2004 when I had conducted an evangelistic campaign in Ansimé, Dominica, where 4 men drowned, and they came from St. Lucia, they came from Dominica, St. Vincent, and Barbados. So that's one sub-caste group, if you like, so that you have the alliances there. You have the recruiting and you have the alliances, so that if you have in the Eastern
System,
Caribbean,
Pastor
Union,
Dutton, if I
yeah,
can just interject, the system seems to be well organized. You're talking about recruitment taking place. You're talking about
yes,
nationals of one island going to another. Is it that the recruitment is to bring back the nationals from the other island to their base, or you recruit to do the crime in that said country?
but you're right. Yeah, you showed great insight there. There are two dimensions there. One is
Right.
the recruiting people within to operate in the island, and if they show finesse, let me tell you something. They have an evaluation and marketing skill that is second to none, and certainly embarrassing. CARICOM. I listened to the Prime Minister and Martin George talk. All right, about homegrown gang leaders in Tobago, of course, but who's doing the growing? I mean, if Trinidadians could, recruit in Antigua and St. Lucia, they wouldn't recruit in Tobago. So the recruitment process has been going on for a good while in Tobago. So that it's only part of the story for the Prime Minister and Martin George to say the crime being done by homegrown people there. All right? There are people there in Tobago who are criminals, who have guns, who run gangs, and they have been nurtured and trained by people on Trinidad and other Caribbean islands. I'm now hearing about a recruit in Jamaica who is a dancehall singer, a software engineer, and I had a meeting recently to deal with the same crime thing. And they brought somebody from Turks and Caicos to have a meeting with me, and they were talking about this dancehall artist who is at the back of some of the recruiting campaigns. And notice part of the lyrics happens to be six killing seven. All right. So you have numbers 6 and 7 recruiting, and you have 8 and 9 also. Those are the gangs that are surfacing now. So you have 6 and 7 and 8 and 9. What I'm showing you is that the gangs are operating with impunity. They're
Right.
operating as if you have no police service whatsoever.
Right.
And I was stunned when I heard this morning about a shooting on somebody in a critical condition in Tobago. But
Yes.
that is going to continue. Sorry to be the bearer of the bad news, until we develop the will. Of course, number one, the faith in God. Number two, the will, all right, to conquer this thing and understand that we have got to break the back of the recruitment racket and the protection racket. What do I mean by the protection racket? What do I mean is that you have assassins who are protected by people in security institutions in Trinidad and Tobago who not only should know better, all right, but who, I mean, are just going ahead. So it's not the gangs by themselves, it's the gangs, with corrupt police, it's the gangs with corrupt soldiers. I rescued a girl and in a police station in Trinidad. Could you imagine that? And the police officer was telling me, "You must think you're a family life man. You're a pastor, so you should be a family life man. Get the girl to go back with the guy. But which guy she must go back with? A drug dealer. And who was guarding the drug dealer? A police and a soldier. Now, I tell you this, sir. I think we need, sometimes we need a foreign a force to come in here, all right, to really put an, I mean, stymie and stifle this thing because it is going
Pastor
fast.
Dottin, we had in the past, two commissioner of police and assistant commissioner of police from overseas, and you're talking maybe we need somebody from outside our country, our system, to come and put a handle on this. But we don't. I don't think we want that because we've
No,
tried
we
it.
don't want that. Well, in fact, before Dwayne Gibbs came and it was key, I was on the Police Service Commission, so I could give you first-hand knowledge. All right. At that time, the head of the Police Service Association told us straight they don't want a foreigner. That's colonial. All
Right.
right. And by the way, when they came here, they was frustrated. No hell,
Oh.
when they came here, I could tell you about that. I mean, I know that firsthand. They were frustrated like that. In fact, Edwardsky came to my office at Maraval Road. Okay, that's a center now, for the fight against crime. God has used me to turn that part of that office into that. And they came to me and they complained. Remember, they had bought a Cessna, a small aircraft. And let me tell you something. That was shut down. They were accused of they wanted to accuse them of corruption. That's the corrupt people accusing innocent people of corruption. So they were happy to get out. Okay, that is serious. We need to give more teeth to the police complaint authority. We need to, I mean, perhaps now it's the time to have the police service commission go full time, as with the teaching service commission. So there are infrastructural issues we have to deal with. There are institutional reform issues that we have to deal with. But I would tell you this, I think the biggest idea, we passing bill after bill after bill, and the opposition cooperated with the government, on the last bill there, was it the whistleblower bill? But I'm saying you need more than that. You have to have a bill, but you have to have a will to implement the bill. And I have said before, for example, that behind every corrupt cop is a politician and an attorney, all right, and a businessman. Behind every corrupt, consistently, I use the adverb, consistently corrupt cop, you have these people there who are sit in high places, if you please, mounted upon their metaphorical thrones. And that is what is happening. And if we have to succeed, we have to take some bold decisions. All right.
That's
I
in
mean, I would tell you.
who is taking those bold decisions, because we've heard this time and time again where even those who are arrested and charged, you hear people say, but that's a small fry, that's a small man, and the police is only going after them, and the ones who really controlling the network are the untouchables. How do we really get to these so-called untouchables and deal with them? Because these are people allegedly of influence who have used their protection, etc. And every conversation around crime, the conversation goes in this particular way, where we talk about the untouchables, the ones who are higher up the ladder, and nothing seems to be, done about these individuals.
Nothing seems to be done because we're in league with them. The IADB, let me come to the challenge here. The IADB, that's Inter-American Development Bank, says that 30% of our economy, all right, has a link with the underworld. Now, these are people, they ain't linked to none of us, so they could speak freely. So the expert is saying, the IADB, that at least 30% of our gross domestic product, all right? Let us say our gross domestic product, the GDP is $150 billion. Our budget is 50 billion, right? Around 50 billion. I don't know where input will go in the next budget, which should be an election budget or election guided budget.
Right.
One third of 150 billion is 50 billion. You know what? I've done the maths for you right there. It means that the IADB is saying that the underground trade, including narcotics and illegal gambling, etc., is equivalent to a national budget, which means that the illicit activities actually shore up and keeping your economy in a certain level of buoyancy. It's not the 50 billion, all right, alone. So it's keeping the thing afloat, buoyant. So they have to recognize that. I would suggest a couple of things if you don't mind. Number one, we need to have constitution reform when it comes to campaign financing, because the godfathers get their strength from the political directorate, and the political directorate is accepting money from them every election to make sure they win the election, because millions and millions and millions of dollars are spent in the election. I think we have got to engage groups like, if we serious, like the DA and the FBI and Scotland Yard, groups like that. In fact, I would go so far, although Israel is at war and like a second war developing right now with the killing of 10 in the Golan Heights yesterday, I would suggest to you that the Mossad is a security agency we must look at. But clearly, we can't do it by ourselves. It is bigger than us. All right? The drug trade is bigger than our budget. It is bigger than our security services. The AR-15 weapons have been found in more and more crimes. The AR-15 killed 2 Adventist young people last year, a couple, if you please, and they're found in more and more crimes. The guns are coming in. We're now admitting that there's compromising in the customs, in the custom sheds and what have you there. So you've got to weed out corruption. We have got to hope, all right, that the powers that be get the testicular and ovarian fortitude to weed out corruption. We, the citizens, have to play a role. Let me tell you something. The day 50,000 people in Trinidad get together and march and stage a counter invasion in the communities, it will frighten the mafia and frighten, all right, the powers that be. And that is what we have. Kafra Kambon told me that years ago. And every day I live, I believe that that has to happen. The people have got to rise up, all right? Don't wait to just stain their finger next year when I think national elections are due. But you have to rise up now, all right? And speak truth to power. When I say truth to power, I don't only mean political power, but the awesome power that the drug lords have in the community. I'm saying that is where we have to go. It's a tall
Right.
order,
And
it's a Mount Everest, but we have to decide to go there.
right. I just want us to go to a break. So, viewers, we are going for a break. And when we come back, Pastor Dottin, I want us to change a bit and look on, let's talk a little about domestic violence, and then we'll come back to crime in general. So, viewers, we're going
Sure.
to take a quick break and we'll be right back.
Good morning, Tobago.
Welcome back, viewers. Thank you for staying with us. If you are now joining us, I am Natalie Sealy-Richardson, and you are viewing GMT Good Morning Tobago. We continue with our guest this morning, Pastor Clive Dottin, someone who's no stranger to us here, not just in this island, but throughout the region and the world, if I may say. And we're talking about crime. So, Pastor Dottin, as I mentioned before the break, I mean, there's so much. I always say the conversation about crime it can go on forever and ever. But I want us to switch gears. And because I know the focus is on violent crime, we see the murder rate going up, but I want us to look at domestic violence for a bit. And let's talk about how that is also contributing to the increase in crime in Trinidad and Tobago. And if I may also get your perspective on the reverse of roles. So most times we talk about domestic violence, we talk about the female being the victim. We know that males are also victims, but because of how we are trained in our society, it is something that you hardly hear about. So I want us to talk a bit about that.
Well, let me start there. We hardly hear about it. Well, in the first place, it's less than 10%. Huh? So you might have every now and then a murder. You might have men suffering in silence. Rondell Fields talks about that all the time. But the truth be told, when it comes to the murder, all right, in terms of murders from acts of domestic violence, the women are the victims most of the time. The fact that the men don't speak out is because sometimes more police officers relate to it. You let a woman beat you, boy. Huh? You let a woman harass you. If I was there, I'd have deal with her a long time. And that words mean a lot. Huh? You mean the fight against crime and the fight against domestic violence. So there's that kind of attitude that, you know, men you know, men could abuse women and do them what they want, but the women don't have a recourse. So that is a serious thing. I think in terms of going forward, we need a lot more support groups for women on the ground. Now we have some very aristocratically organized support groups at the top. But in terms of in the communities, using your community centers, for example, where you could have support groups and where the women are effectively protected, that's a missing dimension. It's a missing dimension in crime. It's a missing dimension in terms of, the fight against drugs, for example, the formation of support groups. So I am advocating for that in a big way and have it implemented in a bigger way than it's being implemented right now. Now, coming to domestic violence, the latest case is from South Trinidad. And I should tell you, Natalie, that latest case was a former student of Southern Academy of Seventh-day Adventists. She went to school there. All right. Now, let's look at the issue. She was in a safe house, right? I think we clear on that. She was in a safe house. She left the safe house. All right. Perhaps she was fed up. Perhaps she felt she's claustrophobic. I don't know. But she left the safe house and went back. And from what the family is saying, the guy and her, like there was some connection, and we have got to watch that in these safe houses. And he agreed to be different. He agreed, all right, to change his evil and wicked ways. All right, he agreed to that. And the next, she goes back and she's killed. Now, are there lessons we could learn for the latest case? Because she's not the first one to go back and get killed and to fall for the serpentic lies, of the former lover or husband, common law, capital law. So that we have got to educate women. Now, let me tell you the truth. Huh? I don't think, in terms of prevention, we're doing a good job either. So we're losing the battle of rehabilitation and losing the battle in terms of prevention because we are so caught up with the murders. We are so caught up, all right, with the rehab dimension. We are forgetting we have a responsibility to young people who are not yet involved in crime, not yet involved in violence, including domestic violence. All right, we have got to look at that carefully. Should we spend more, therefore, in educating our young people, in having a consistent program in our schools? The other thing is we have got to educate relatives because relatives claim that they go to the police service. In other words, if the police service doesn't show much interest, last year I had 3 cases where people went to the police service and were turned back, like family business. We have time with that. The murders are rate occupying our time. So we've got to look at our protective services and how we could change their perspective in terms of relating to situations involving the family. Let me tell you something. My opinion is that a lot of the police stations do a very poor job in terms of relating to people who have a claim. My son is beating me. My son is harassing me. All right. There's violence in the home. My son is threatening to kill me. Some police officers, you could say about that, man. That's a family thing. We don't have time.
Yes.
Now, there are other stations and other police officers doing a fantastic job with this, and they get involved. Now, in terms of changing perspective going forward, we have this talk about soft policing and hard policing. All right. For example, police officers who are involved in community work are looked at soft police. They're involved in the police youth club. They are looked at soft policing. And I think we have got to change that perspective, starting with the police academy in St. James. We have got to change that perspective because a police officer who is involved in going to the schools, all right, and doing prevention work and teaching young people how to make the best choices. They are doing an awesome job. The few police who are engaged in that. But I think we need to target our schools where the police, the pastors, the psychologists get together and form an alliance to really educate the young people. In terms of pastors, in New York up here, something called the God Squad. And a former SDA pastor, Beryl Matthews, is heavily involved in it. So they're in the community, all right? They're in the hot spots, the God Squad. And I think the IRO, which I see coming alive, must look at this very carefully. Could we form squads, all right, where of citizens, of volunteers, of retired workers, for example, of men, especially fathers, to come on board with this and set up this organization with the interreligious body, doing it because I do it, but I mean, I'm doing it because of my own passion and conviction. Because we have this group called COP, which we want to launch in Tobago very soon in Mount St. George. All right. So that I feel the issue of support groups, the issue of voluntary squads, the issue of staging counter invasion in our communities, no matter how much guns you have and how the gang leaders threaten you. I am saying that no gang leader, I will not allow him to intimidate me. But if he has the power of the devil behind him, and I have the power of God behind me, and the power of God is more effective and efficacious than the power of the demons, I am saying we should not allow those guys to intimidate us because they are winning the battle. And they will continue to win until we have a situation like Haiti. Haiti beckons us, Haiti, Natalie, is at our door, and we must not allow that to happen.
You mentioned the influence of pastors in that program. I want to ask because I know of your work from Friends Forever, you working with the late Terence Boze at the Marble Family Crisis and bringing that God aspect. I think conveniently we're a society that we remind ourselves we are religious when it suits us, and other times we behave as though we don't know who God is. And when I say God, I'm not just talking about Christianity, but whatever religion we may have here. How do we use that spiritual influence, right? And when I say that, I'm not just talking about Christianity, but the religions we have present, those who are spiritual, those who have a relationship with that superior being. How do we use that influence to effect change? Because many people will say, when a day of prayer is called, I can't do anything, that's not solving anything. But coming from you, do you think that if we really channel energies and those who are from those sects can really have or effect change if they really call upon God?
Well, Trinidad and Tobago, more so Trinidad, has a weapon, all right, of plurality that should be a strength. But because of the divisive nature of the politics, and I don't know if you watch what happened, but I am Brooklynian and I am seeing it. Whenever he celebrates July 27, the coup, every year, nearly for the past 30 years. So you had a new political party joining him, Hope, and you had the remnants of COP, all right? But you realize you had no significant person there in terms of the government. And that is because of the sterile, puerile, all right, rotten approach to nation building that we have. So if your party there and your party pushing that, I can't support you. That has got to be eradicated going forward. And I believe more religious leaders must emphasize that. The politics of the country, all right, is facilitating crime because it's divisive, it's this side, it's them versus us. And that has got to be eradicated. And pastors who believe in God, who believe, of course, that I must respect convictions. That's the hallmark of religious freedom and religious liberty. We have got to play a role in calling, in speaking truth to power, and telling the politicians who continue to divide us that we will no longer be divided. And I believe, I think sometimes some of us as religious leaders sell out to political parties because of what we can get or what we are getting. And that must end. So we are part of the problem too. All right, instead of being part of the solution, we are part of the problem. So that I am not going to condemn a national day of prayer, but what happens after the national day of prayer? That must be translated into the communities where you have the crisis. You can't have a national day of prayer and telling me you're scared of the bandits and they have guns, etc. Last year I had an experience there where when these young people were being killed, they threatened to wipe out, the guy threatened to wipe out the whole community. And I'm challenging the police to arrest him because it is known he is the one. And they know that he is the one. And yet he's not being arrested. And the next person I have to go to is the Minister of National Security. If you would have an audience with me, well, I see we have two now. So they should have more time. Each of them should have more time to relate to citizens like me who are in the trenches with people like Officer Shabadi and Director Steve Bing in charge of, you should know him, security at University of the Southern Caribbean. And I'm saying that we have got to move forward. We cannot be silent. We cannot sell our souls because of a benefit to the political directorate. We have got to stand up. Now is the time that we must stand up more than ever. All right. I think of a Pentecostal pastor in California who broke the back of school violence in a place called San Luis Obispo County. All right. He got retired members from his church to go there at lunchtime in the schools. In other words, start where you could start. You can't change the whole thing overnight because
Yes,
this
definitely.
decline took place over a number of decades and it wouldn't be
Pastor,
solved. It would take
and I
about
think so
10
it
years.
has to be intentional because we have some of these programs. You have religious groups going into our secondary schools. You have RI, but is it that we're just doing these things and we're not intentional? We don't have
Well,
set goals.
Natalie, let me come to that. Let me come to that. Doing RI doesn't really cut it, unless you're appealing, responding to the issues. So that, all right, let's say the Hindu guy goes in a Christian dominated school. He has about 6 people, so he relates to the 6 people. The Pentecostal might have about 50. The Adventist might have about 30. All right, so you're doing religious instruction. But even that has to be changed. There was one prime minister who I think wanted intentionality and change the focus of that religious instruction period. That was Patrick Manning. And I went with a fellow called Keller, who is dead now, at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine campus. And Manning was saying, let us start to pay religious instruction instructors. Let us start to pay the RI. In other words, he was calling for a greater level of professionalism in it. So I think the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Youth must form an alliance, all right, and Ministry of Ecclesiastical Affairs, which may still be under the domain of the prime minister. I am saying let us form that alliance and restructure that whole RI program, not just to deal with the few people from our religion or the many who may be there if you have a majority in that school, but to look at the critical issues and combining resources together within each of the secondary schools primarily, because you still have primary school, or I hear a lot of vaping in the primary school too. So I warn the Ministry of Education, I warn tutor, there are reports coming of increased smoking via vaping in our primary schools. So I'm sounding an alarm on that, all right? I'm sounding an alarm on that. But in terms of our secondary schools where you have gang violence going on there too, that the religious instructors should come together and look at the situation holistically and not just be concerned with teaching our particular doctrine.
Was we have to stick a pin here. We are going for a
Yes.
break, and when we return, we continue a very interesting conversation with Pastor Dutton this morning. Welcome back, viewers. Thank you for staying with us, and we continue our conversation this morning with Pastor Clive Dottin, and we are speaking about crime. Pastor Dottin, you mentioned, the contribution, sorry, that can come from schools, if it is we are more intentional. Now, I want us to narrow in on Tobago a bit. I always say Tobago is very small, and you have that culture, although it is changing, it's still present in most of the villages, if I may say, where you know when an outsider comes in. And I always give the example for Charlottesville. If you drive into Charlottesville village, I mean, it's one way in, that one way out, and you are not from there, before you get to the gas station or the jetty, everybody knows an outsider is in, And when we look at how Tobago is and the culture of Tobago, the traditions where, the family lineage and connection is important. People usually ask, what is your family name? Who is your father? And they interrogate you in that line. When we have the crime increasing in Tobago, we are up to, and we want to focus on murders because that's the increase in violent crime and the guns, etc. Somehow, we are up to 15, 16 about. And I want us to look at the homes now because I believe that, our, and I want to phrase it correctly, our young people who are getting into crime, it's not just happening overnight. And many of us know who have the guns. Many of us know who is, the perpetrators of the crime, and we don't say anything. And maybe for various reasons. How do we get back that closeness, that kind of network where, we say, hey, we are not standing for this. This is not who we are as a people. And you mentioned, coming together and that unity. How do we get that back? And I want us to look at the influence or the contributions homes can make in the fight against crime.
Well, I think you have touched a major issue this morning in terms of homes, in terms of how we operate in our homes, how the parents operate. But I want to say this, and my first answer is a deadly answer, and that is remember, there are crime is intergenerational. Again, the negative elements have gone ahead. So you have grandparents involved in crime, parents involved in crime, and grandchildren involved in crime. This is what makes it so difficult in Trinidad to deal with. I think, as you quite rightly said, Tobago still has some pristine virtue in it, but it's being penetrated. So that I call for support groups among parents, greater level of marriage enrichment programs within the churches, a strengthening of families that are weaker, especially single parent homes. Now, I don't know if you ever heard me say this, Natalie, but there was a case in Tobago I got involved in last year. And I got involved because the mother of the children, the single mother. So we have to look at single mothers. We have got to look at double parents, binary homes. We have got to look at all of that and develop specific strategies to deal with them. But I'll give you one example. This girl has two children for a guy who turned out to be a drug lord. And after I preached at Sandy River, she came to me. She said, Pastor, I lived with a man for 5 years. And the last 2 years, he was planning to kill me. I didn't know. And as I found out how heavy he was involved in drugs, and he's a pretty rich Afro Tobagonian. She says, I left him and I moved out with my children. Now she has a lot of faith in God, I could tell you. And she got baptized last year. Revival. I was involved in the climax of the revival. Pastor Cook was doing it on Sunday and Wednesday nights for like 6 months. He's health focused a lot. So that what I'm saying is that we have got to separate, disaggregate what is taking place, all right? And look at all the various types of families. You have the family with the visiting father. You have the family that is seemingly okay with mother and fathers, although some of them are shaking too. And you have the single parent home in the minority of instances where the father is the parent, and you have the majority where the mother is the parent. So I believe we have got to look at the issue of families. And one thing politicians and pastors could combine on is bringing parents and families together, and and strengthen groups like the parent teacher associations, because that could be a powerful weapon if managed correctly. So I'm saying let us empower the PTAs. Let us empower parent groups and family life groups. Our churches now have family life directors. All right, people look at the family. In some churches, you have men's ministries that I think is a crucial need right now. Huh? So you have women's groups and you have men groups. What we have to do is to empower them, and perhaps the state could play a role in empowering and resourcing these groups. If we don't want to give money, well, at least provide resources like audiovisual aids, for example. Provide counselors to come in, like once a month and speak to these groups. Those are ways we could move forward, because I tell you, we have to strengthen. The home is the number one challenger because we have a lot of broken homes. The 21st century is characterized not just by global warming, but by broken homes, broken families, estranged parents. And this hurts us in the issue against crime, because you can't get a united effort, in terms of aggressive criminal activity in the community and in the criminal activity in the schools that is taking place. I wanted to say something, Natalie, about RI again.
Hmm.
Some church people are discouraged because of the high level of indiscipline in the school. And one reason why they're discouraged, they're only there for like 45 minutes, all right, on an average. One reason why they're discouraged is that the teachers seldom play a role in RI.
Yeah.
So
Oh.
when you have, like, I went Mokurapo Composite, all right, and I had a very dysfunctional girl who was disrupting the whole class. There was not one teacher around to help me. All right, not
Because the
one
teachers,
teacher.
the teachers use that as a break, Pastor Dutton. They are
Yes,
glad
that
when
is
you
a
have
fact.
those sessions, they non-teaching period, and it's hands off. And again,
Well,
we
I
talk
think,
about being intentional many times. And I mean, I'm hearing you talking about unity and these things, but nobody wants to do the work. So where are we going to really start?
well, I am saying, and I am hoping that Mount St. George becomes a great pilot project. But myself and Brother Bing and a few other people, Rondell Fields has been in there too. We want to form a Life Hope Center in there. In fact, I went to Faith Be Israel and
Yeah.
told her, let us have a wellness center. Let us establish the first wellness center to deal with that addiction and crime and everything one time. And she said she would welcome that. I've been a bit slow in coming because I'm so downright busy. But in September, I'm going to approach Faith Be Israel and ask her to fulfill her promise, and let us plan together to set up a pilot project. I think we should have pilot projects across Sonny Craig. All right, has spoken to me of what's happening in the west of Tobago and the criminality. We know Mount St. George at one time was considered the home of guns and ammunition, but the west has been penetrated a long while now, and also by Trinidadians, I want to say. Okay, so that I'm saying that the recruitment strategies of the local mafia must be challenged by the recruitment strategies of mainstream community, the church, the home, and the school. That triangulation is what will help us win the battle, because we are losing the battle right now.
Definitely. And when you look at combining those three areas, again, you know, it brings your point into reality in terms of the unity working together. And many of us seem hopeless because when we look at the changes, but I always try to encourage us, the solution starts with us. We have beautiful roundtables as Trinbagonians. We know how to speak eloquently. We come up with, or we are good at identifying the problems. But when it comes to finding the solutions and then implementing it, there's usually a breakdown there. So I want you this morning to use your influence. We don't know who's listening. Just encourage, whether it's that NGO president or someone who's thinking of, they maybe studied a particular area and want to contribute. How do we really rally people to get on board and to effect change?
I would say start with, up in Picton Road there was a group called Gospel in the Bones, a Seventh-day Adventist group, a support group, and they brought me inside Picton, and I started with two families, all right, two families, and that family is doing pretty well right now. One of those families, the other family kind of fell off their edge, but they're trying to pull themselves back together. But I want to tell NGOs, start with one person at a time. I've adopted a 9-month-old baby in Gangland territory in Tunapuna, 9-year-old child. I help to support that child. I want to give that child a fighting chance. For example, her uncle was shot and killed. He was shot in his right eye and killed in a merciless fashion. And I was helping him for 3 months. So start with one child. Start with one family. All right, don't try to change the whole world overnight. That, as you said, it wouldn't happen. So start with one person. And by the way, I want to tell you about young people. I have been involved with over 40 years in young people. I'm no longer the youth director, but I stay focused on trying to rescue young people in troubled situations. Young people see right through us. There's a lot of hypocrites trying to talk change to young people, and they don't role model the change in their own lifestyle. But I am saying start with one. All right, the power of one. Start with one, and that will spread like a wildfire. Start with one. It will take time. Don't put over pressure on yourself by trying to change your whole community one time. Start with one person. Start with one family. Start with one school. Start with one church. Start with one village, and then it will spread. And be committed and be consistent, and make sure God is on your side. Let me say the last thing here. I know our time is running out. It's demons roaming the land too. Let us not forget the supernatural in this whole thing. It's a great controversy and expression that we Adventists are very accustomed to. It's a great controversy. And the demons are telling the young people that they're winning. They're on the winning side. They will get rich if they follow them. All right. And many young people don't know about demons, about blood drinking, about the secret orders, about the lodges, about the godfathers. We have got to redefine that for them. And I'm saying to all of us that we can win the battle by God's grace. And by the way, church, let us not hide behind prophecy as an excuse for our inertia, for being passive, for doing absolutely nothing and saying, well, it forecasted in the Bible. The same Bible says we must go to all the world and every nation and every tongue and every community and every village. It's the same Bible that says God will pour His Spirit upon us to make a difference. It's the same Bible that says we must teach, preach, and baptize. It's the same Bible that says that God will be with you and protect you. It's the same Bible that promises victory in the name of Jesus. God bless you.
I have to say amen to that, Pastor. Thank you so much. And I don't have anything to add to that, but I want to remind our viewers that line you shared with us, the power of one. I think it runs deep, and if we really internalize it, we understand how powerful that can become. The power of one. Don't try to change the world overnight, but you do what you can in your corner, the power of one. Thank you so much, Pastor Dottin, for spending this hour with us. We appreciate it, and we ask God's continued blessings over what you do in your ministry as well.
God bless. God bless.
Viewers, thank you so much for spending time with us this morning. It's just about that time when we have to say goodbye. I want to wish you a beautiful and blessed Monday morning. And I want you to remember, as you go through this day and you try to stay as safe as you can, the power of one. Thank you for being with us this morning.
It's a brand new morning, rise up to a brand new dawning. As the passion start to rise, the energy fill the sky.